Oh, we have no audio. There we are. Gorgeous. Hello, everyone. Hopefully, you can hear us and see us from about 3 minutes ago. Yeah, I was just saying, yeah, we're an hour later than normal today because we were pre-recording an interview, which will be part of this podcast towards the end. But yeah, we needed a bit of time just to put that together for this show, so we pushed the episode back an hour. But that's okay. All right, I'm ready to go when you are.
2 secs. I just sent out the tweet.
When is Windows 11 22H2 coming to stable release? Probably in September or October. That is usually when new versions of Windows begin rolling out.
Oh, I gotta open 2 more seconds. Sorry, just gotta open the YouTube link.
At this point, why not live interview? Not everybody's schedules lined up with our show. So, yeah. Yeah, we're back at 2:30 only for this week. We'll be back at 1:30 next week, so keep that in mind.
Hopefully you won't hear my kitty cat meowing. Or maybe you'll enjoy my kitty cat meowing. I don't know. Quality. All right, I think I'm now ready to go. Get the notes. Kitty, you gotta go. Sorry. All right, I am now recording.
I am now recording as well.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Windows Essential Podcast, episode 278 for July 29th, 2022. I did not change the notes for this week, so I had to quickly look at where we are. But we are back after taking a week off. We'll be covering all the Windows 11 news. There are a bunch of builds that came out, as well as Zach's exclusive story that we missed last week on the podcast, which was the Surface Duo Chronos. That is what was a planned mid-range version of the original Surface. Actually, it was Surface Duo 2. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about that, what that means, why maybe they canceled it. We don't absolutely know, but we can speculate a little bit. And we'll say if there's anything with Surface Duo 3. We'll also do the review roundup. We had a bunch of reviews going up this week, including a couple laptops. And I'll talk about finally that keyboard that I mentioned 1 or 2 podcasts ago that I said I had an embargo on. It's the one I switched to, so I'll talk about that. And we'll wrap up with the Dell XPS 13 Plus interview. So we got to talk to some people from Dell regarding that laptop, which I now have in my hand, not literally at the moment, but I'm reviewing that. Actually, I'll also go through. It's been a whirlwind of laptops this week. Apparently, China got its act together as 12th gen Intel and Snapdragons are now shipping. So a bunch of the stuff that's been announced earlier this year is now coming in, and some very, very exciting stuff. Zach, how are you doing on this fine Friday?
I'm good. I just remembered as well, there were Microsoft earnings this week, weren't there?
Oh, yeah, we'll do the earnings.
Yeah, we'll do the earnings. We'll do that. We'll do that towards the sort of middle of the show, I guess. I'll add that to the list.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm not too bad. How are you? I felt like this week was kind of a weird one. It was like half busy because I was working on reviews this week, and you know that makes you feel more busy than you actually are, I feel. But yeah, how are you?
Well, obviously we weren't here last week because some of you may know I actually finally caught COVID. And I do not recommend it. I give it a 0 out of 5 stars. It was not enjoyable at all. I had literally every single symptom with it, and even though vaccinated and booster and all that. Best friend came over. Hi, Seth. Thank you.
Oh, I bet he's never gonna live this down.
Yeah, he felt really, really bad about it. But he came over. And he had tested negative before he came over because of his school where he works at. And he came over and he's like, yeah, it's negative, you know. And then he started not feeling great, so he left, and then he tested positive, and we're like, oh no.
Yeah.
And then I tested positive a day or two later. And yeah, I had fever, I had the cough, I had a stuffy nose, felt tired, I lost my smell and taste. It was just like, and it was like the entire virus, like the whole thing was compacted about 4 days. Like it just went through all the steps. Started to feel better towards the end of the week, but it was a good, yeah, almost 10 days before I kind of really start to feel normal again. But I'm at least feeling normal now. But if I do cough occasionally, that is why. But yeah, hopefully that'll be the last time I get that, because that really wiped me out. But that's okay. We have a lot of good news to cover. So let's get into the Windows 11 stuff. They did something, I believe, for the first time this week, which was ship insider builds from all the channels within one single day. Am I correct in that?
I'm not sure if it was the first time, but it was certainly the first time in a while. Yeah, so they shipped a new dev channel build, a new beta channel builds, a new release preview build, and even a Windows 10 version update. So we'll get to all of that. We'll start with the dev channel build 25169. Not a huge build this week. It introduces a new multi-app kiosk mode, which allows the existing kiosk mode to be configured so it allows more than just one app. But previously it was you would set it to use one app and it would essentially boot to a blank desktop and load up that app. With the multi-app kiosk mode, you can actually configure it so you can essentially see Windows and interact with Windows, but you can block off specific things like what shows up in the start menu, what kind of notifications can come through, what settings can be accessed in the settings app. And then, of course, as it's a multi-app kiosk mode, you can also configure which apps are actually available to the user to use. This will be handy for maybe schools or areas, places where you have to take tests, and there's a number of different programs where the person taking the test needs to sort of interact with. So in the past it wasn't possible to have multiple apps in this mode, but now you can, and that's going to be really nice for those sort of points of service type PCs. And then they've also added a new Windows Spotlight theme. This sort of ties in with the Spotlight wallpaper option that's been in the Insider Preview builds for a while now. All this really does is just brings that option to the forefront of the personalization tab in the settings app, so you can click on it, and it will give you the daily Bing wallpaper image, which is super fun. And then lastly, settings now supports managing apps which were earlier only supported from Control Panel. This includes uninstallation of apps which have interdependencies, for example, Steam and gaming apps running on Steam, repair and modifying of Win32 apps. So what this is referring to is, and this is a big step forward for those people who are quite aggravated by the Control Panel's continued existence. In previous builds, some legacy program, or a number of legacy programs, when you'd go to uninstall them, they would throw you to the old control panel. Instead of taking you to the new modern settings app, it would bring up the legacy control panel and you'd go through there. That should no longer happen, or it should happen a lot less now, which is just another step forward to sort of reducing the control panel's usefulness in Windows to the point where they can get to a point in the future where they can remove it outright. We're not there yet, but baby steps. We're slowly but surely getting there. And that's really the most notable stuff in this build for the dev channel. Nothing too huge, as I mentioned, but still nice to see. If we move over to the beta channel builds, build 22621 and 22622, obviously all the new features we're about to mention are only available in the 22622 enablement package. 22621 is the sort of vanilla features off by default build for version 22H2. So 22622 has the new taskbar overflow UI, which will appear when you max out the available space on your taskbar. This is great for devices with small screens. So what will happen now is if you have multiple icons that don't actually fit anymore on your taskbar, they'll go into this sort of nice looking overflow menu, which you can click on, and that will pull up an additional menu with more taskbar icons, which is pretty nice. They're also updating the dynamic weather, the dynamic widgets button to include more than just weather information. Right now, as you know, in the bottom left corner of the taskbar, it shows you the weather. We're starting with this build. You will now see breaking news alerts, finance or stock updates, and sports updates in addition to weather. So that's really nice and make it a little bit more dynamic down there, which is cool. The last sort of big notable change with this build is they've also added a new Open With Dialog UI, which updates its design from the Windows 8 design to the Windows 11 design language, and it looks really quite nice. This is really interesting because I think this build got a couple more features than the dev channel build. And this is sort of what Microsoft was referring to when they announced the changes to the Insider program a number of months back, where they were like, none of these branches are reflective of any version of Windows. The beta channel may sometimes get features before dev channel. And I think in this case, it has gotten one or two. I think the dynamic widgets one is not in the dev channel. I could be wrong about that. Regardless, this is for the 22622 build, which is the enablement package build. And, you know, we talked a couple of weeks back about the change to the Windows development schedule and how they're going to one major version every 3 years and then are doing, you know, feature drops sort of in between. And the feature drops will start with version 22H2 later this year. As far as we're aware, version 22H2 will begin rolling out in September or October. And the first sort of feature drop moments will not be far behind. And this first feature drop, I think, is what is in testing right now in the beta channel. So the things like taskbar overflow, dynamic widgets, tabs in File Explorer, this new open with dialog, all of that stuff that we just talked about will be in the first moment. So I don't think it'll be there on the shipping vanilla build of 22H2. But considering how close behind moment 1 is supposed to be, I think maybe they might even just roll them out together. I'm really not too sure how the rollout method is going to be for this. But yeah, version 22H2 22621 is the sort of shipping build that I think will roll out first. And the 22622 won't be too far behind. So that's how that's planning to work. Then, of course, there'll be more moments throughout 2023. I think the second moment's sort of January, February timeframe, I think it's planned for. Who knows what will be in that? I'm assuming things like the improved, the shy taskbar stuff, where the taskbar would minimize for using a tablet and all that stuff, but that's to talk about for another time. They also released a build 22621.317 to the release preview channel. This is only fixes. Like I said, this is the release preview channel is what is testing the upcoming major release, version 22H2. And that doesn't have any of these new UI stuff, which you just talked about in 22622, which is why I'm sort of leaning on 22622 being the first moment update. And then lastly, Windows 10 version 22H2 has been rolled out to the release preview channel. This was a weird one because this was, in addition to it being made available in the release preview channel, this was the first official confirmation that they're doing a version 22H2. So for Windows 10, we knew they were going to do it, but this is the first time that they've publicly acknowledged it. But it was really weird because they talk about version 22H2 and how it's now available in release preview channels for business and commercial. They do not at any point mention what features will be in this release. And then they actually updated the blog post later last night saying, this build is focused on validating the services and technology. Windows 10 version 22H2 has a scoped set of features, and Microsoft will share more details on this update later this year. So that basically means it's going to have basically nothing in it unless you're a business, in which case, even then, it will be a very small set of features that most businesses may not even care about. So this is a nothing burger, really. This is really only for support life cycles. Remember, Windows 10 needs to be supported until 2025, so they have to keep running out new versions because Windows 10 has really weird support life cycles for each new version. But that's all the Windows Insider news for this week. Dan, do you care?
No. I will say, though, I tweeted out regarding the dev channel about those context menus getting updated. And it had a lot of favorites and likes and whatever, and people excited about it. So, yeah. And to address that, you know, someone asked me on Twitter, like, why are they just doing this now? And I'm like, you know, the answer should be kind of obvious. It takes time. Like, that's why, you know, Windows 11's been out for 10 months now, technically longer a little bit with the betas, but they couldn't do everything all at once while still getting the operating system out at that time frame that they wanted to. And I would argue that functionality and stability were the real kind of goals, along with the new start menu and some of the kind of core experiences for Windows 11. But when it comes to updating the legacy menus and maybe someday control panel, yeah, they wanted to do that, but should they delay Windows 11 by like a year just to get around to doing all that stuff? I don't think so. This isn't stuff that most people notice. I think it's a good sign, though, again, that, you know, we said this before, that someone appears to be paying attention, right, to all these small details, and they are getting around to it finally to update all this stuff. In terms of like people like, well, I'm sure Microsoft as a company could afford to hire more people to do this faster. Sure, they could, but Windows 11 is but one part of their business, and they don't need to, sink in more money to hire people to update the UI and then lay off those people months later when it's all done. Uh, so I think this is a good sign, though. It's going to take a while. The code in Windows 11 goes back 20 years in some places. Like it's not easy to go back and just update stuff because today's developers who are working on it weren't the ones who worked on it 20 years ago. So they have to go through the code and be like, oh, this is connected to this, and if we change this, it's going to affect here. And like there's a lot of it's like getting your headphones, the wired headphones, when they'd be all knotted up in your pocket and you have to undo it all. Like it's like that. Like it takes them a little while to get around to it. And like I said, I know a lot of people are excited about this stuff, but it's not a priority for them. Now it's becoming a priority because Windows 11, the core features are done. And they're obviously adding some more refinements here and there. So they're getting around to this stuff, which is great. But that's why, that's why it is.
Yeah,
so.
and you mentioning there how Windows is so odd and it's like a ball of wires. This is essentially correct, which is kind of why Windows Core OS existed, because they looked at Windows Desktop and was like, it is too complicated to try and do what we want to do in regards to modernizing this legacy OS. So let's basically do it from the ground up, and that's what birthed Windows Core OS. Windows Core OS didn't have the legacy control panel. That was where that didn't exist. If you guys are looking for a version of Windows that doesn't have the legacy control panel, that Windows Core was that. But obviously Windows Core sort of hasn't taken off in the sort of desktop space, unfortunately, and likely never will. Though I do understand that Microsoft is sort of trying that idea again, but not from it. So there's this thing called Core PC, which I've been sort of digging around about. I think a few people on Twitter have mentioned it as well. I've been talking to a few sources recently about it. I don't know too much yet, but basically how it's been described to me is as a hybrid Windows Classic and Windows Core sort of thing. So instead of it being... Essentially what it does is it maintains the native sort of Win32 app compatibility. Nothing's virtualized. It's still Windows that runs Win32 programs. But they're trying to bring over things like the ability to service Windows faster. Windows Core OS, one of the big things they were able to do with it was full version Windows, sort of major Windows upgrades were done in less than a few minutes because it just sort of needed a restart. There wasn't this whole process of having to essentially reinstall new versions of Windows every year or however many years it is. So I think they did that through state separation, which I assume is what they're trying to bring over with Core PC. Obviously, there's a driver isolation or something along those lines. So lots of security stuff and servicing stuff that Core PC should hopefully bring over to Windows Desktop. Now, I don't think this will be made available to existing PCs. I assume this will be a clean install thing or something you can only buy on new PCs. And this isn't going to happen for a long while yet. But they are sort of working on bringing the best of Windows Core and the best of Windows Classic together. Could that be a Windows 12 thing or, a Next Valley thing? I don't know. That could be a next Valley thing for all I know. But it's something they're thinking about. And so I'll be super interested to see where that goes in the future. But yeah, I think that's basically all of the Windows news for this week.
So you're confirming Surface Neo is back.
I'm not doing that. I do not think Surface Neo will return, unfortunately. Not in its initial sort of dual screen form, at least.
Right. Well, that makes sense. Well, that does it for the Windows 11 news. We'll see what happens. I still got to update it on my the Lenovo Yoga 9i14, which is the one I was having some issues with when I had the release preview, and I was getting some like performance issues with YouTube. So I have to go through and update that there. I don't think I've really put 22H2 on really any other PCs yet. So
I think it's ready. So I think you should jump in the beta channel on everything you can at this point because it is pretty stable, and it's around the corner.
Beta or release preview?
I would go with beta because beta has a few additional new features which are basically good to go. At this point, beta's not testing anything groundbreaking, so I wouldn't worry too much. If you are feeling sheepish, then obviously the release preview channel is probably better, but I would recommend beta channel.
Yeah, I mean, for those who don't remember, release preview will be pretty much, we know exactly what's shipping in 22H2.
Yeah.
And if you stay in that channel, you'll just get the update early. Whereas the beta, yeah, you may lose some features or something when it comes out. Plus, you have to remember to change your channel later if you don't want to be part of beta, which is always a thing. All right, let's go to the big story that happened. Surface Duo Chronos, you covered this, and we've actually talked about this on the podcast, not directly, but we've hinted at it that, hey, maybe they could make a cheaper version and, use plastic instead of glass and maybe reduce the cameras and how this would all make sense. And we were being a little coy there because you had already heard that they were kind of working on this. But then what happened was you found on eBay, much to your disappointment, a auction that already had ended of the prototype actually for sale. So Zach this one got away from him. And it's a real shame because this was a working prototype as far as we know. And it looked really awesome. But why don't you explain, a little bit more about that, how you found it, and, what this device was supposed to be. And more importantly, why we don't have it, and are they going to bring it back?
Yeah, so I came across this listing while it was still live, actually, I believe, but I didn't immediately buy it because I wasn't too sure if it was even real. Obviously, I knew about the mid-range device. I'd heard about it from countless people months beforehand, which is why we were teasing it on the podcast, during 2021. But I asked around. I was like, so yeah, I've found this. Is this the thing that we were talking about X amount of months ago? It took a while for me to get a reply or a response from anybody. But by the time I did, the listing had unfortunately disappeared. I assume it was sold to whoever bought it. But it wasn't me, so Microsoft, don't call me. I didn't buy this stolen good property. Okay, But yeah, the device was confirmed to me. It's that I showed the images to my sources. They're like, yep, that's the Chronos device. What is this device? So basically, last year, before the Duo 2 was launched, I started hearing that Microsoft was planning to ship a mid-range Surface Duo at some point during 2023. I believe it was supposed to be the fall of 2023. And this was
2023.
Yes, it was supposed. So the Duo 2 was supposed to come out at the end of 2022 this year.
Yeah,
it was supposed to come out this year. Oh god, my numbers are all over the place. It was supposed to come out later this year, essentially in the fall of this year. And I started hearing about that in I think maybe summer 2021. And I was it was described to me as a pared back Surface Duo 2. So instead of being glass on the outside, it was plastic. Instead of having 3 cameras on the back, it had 2. Instead of having curved displays for things like the glance bar, it had flat displays like the first Surface Duo. And the processor on the inside would have been a step down from the flagship. So I assume it would have been a Snapdragon 7 series chip of some kind. And yeah, it was all in the name of making a more affordable version of the Surface Duo 2. Because as we all know...
Did it still have a 90 hertz display?
I don't remember. I think it might have had a 60 hertz display, but I don't actually know that for sure, so don't quote me on that. But yes, the device was supposed to be a cheaper Surface Duo 2 because we all know the Surface Duo, one of its biggest criticisms is that it's just too expensive. So I guess Microsoft had sort of sat down and gone, okay, how do we solve that problem? Well, let's make a mid-range version. We've got the Surface Duo 2. Let's do Surface Duo Go. There's precedent for this. Surface lines have the Go variants, which are the flagship products, but stripped back to be cheaper. That's what the Surface Go is. That's what the Surface Laptop Go is. So a Surface Duo Go is totally reasonable idea, I think, and this makes sense that Microsoft were thinking about it. Unfortunately, I heard in late 2021, I think a couple months after the Duo 2 came out, that they had actually decided to scrap Chronos. So the mid-range device they were working on was not happening at this point. Which meant there were going to be no device in 2022, which is kind of why we've been saying there's no Duo this year. Duo 3 is currently scheduled for the end of next year. And that's, as far as I'm aware, has always been the plan. That was always going to be Duo 2, mid-range Duo this year, Duo 3 flagship in 2023. The Duo 3 flagship still planned for later in 2023, as far as I'm aware. But this year, we're not getting anything because the mid-range device was cancelled. Now, why was it cancelled? I think there's a few reasons. One of the reasons I heard is because they wanted to focus all of their efforts on the next flagship. With version 3 of anything, they kind of want to get it right. Version 3 is what they sort of aim for as the perfect version of their sort of concept or idea. So they wanted to sort of put all of their resources into that device rather than splitting resources between a mid-range device and a flagship. And I think that was the main reason. That, and also they wanted to focus on the in-market versions of Surface Duo to fix up the software. You know, the Duo 2's review period wasn't very positive. Lots of people were complaining about the software still. So Microsoft decided, hey, instead of, worrying about this next device coming in 2022, let's just focus on the Android and fixing up Android. Because all of the work they do on Android to the Surface Duo 1 and Surface Duo 2, from a software perspective, benefits them for Surface Duo 3. They all share a similar code base. So all of the stability, you've seen how the Duo 2 has been improved, and as a result, the Duo 1's also improved. All of that work also applies to Duo 3. So it makes sense for them to want to focus on the in-market versions from a software perspective, and then internally have all of their attention focused on the next Surface Duo for 2023. So that's kind of why Chronos never happened. It's because they were wanting to focus on the flagship for 2023. And they also, I think, maybe decided that the Duo wasn't ready to sort of be marketed as a more mainstream product. Bringing the price down and shipping a mid-range version would put it in the hands, or put it in front of more people, because it's now more affordable, it's more accessible. And I think maybe Microsoft thought that this form factor, especially with the software at the time in late 2021, just wasn't ready for that, and so they decided to scrap this. So yeah, that's basically the story of Chronos. Was going to be a mid-range product. I think the good news about this, even though it's not coming, is that the Duo team, Surface, Microsoft, does want to expand this mobile idea, right? That they are looking at the Surface Duo is Android mobile app as a whole, and want to do more hardware. It's not just the Surface Duo. I wouldn't be surprised in the future if we see more phones from Microsoft running Android. And the Chronos device, I think, confirms that that's something they want to do at some point. They're just not ready to do it yet. What are your thoughts on this, Dan?
I mean, going by the images, and, I think a lot of people thought this. A lot of people are like, I want that version.
Yeah, right.
The glass exterior definitely gives a premium feeling to Surface Duo and Duo 2 especially. There's no argument there, but it also makes it feel pretty fragile. And going with the what we presume is polycarbonate outer shell, for one, it looks like it would have resisted fingerprints better because it was more of a matte polycarbonate. And it just looked a little bit more durable. Even the camera, you mentioned there's only 2 instead of 3. I would assume they got rid of the telephoto, if they're smart.
Yeah.
And kept the wide and the regular. But even the camera housing was a little bit different. So whereas on the Duo 2, it had sharp angles where the bump comes out, this was more because it was with the polycarbonate, they could kind of graduate, and it kind of curves up around the camera, which I think actually looks a little bit better as well. But yeah, there were trade-offs, right? The displays aren't curved on the inside, which makes sense. We don't know if it was 60 or 90 hertz. It would have been nice if it was still 90 hertz at least, but I wouldn't have been surprised if they made it at 60 hertz. And the processor would have been fine too, because Surface Duo 1 only has a Snapdragon 855 or whatever that is.
Yeah.
So this would have been much more powerful than that. And the pricing, we don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if the retail would have been $999.
Yeah.
Which would have then allowed them to bring it down to like maybe $799 or $899 if they want to do a sale. It looks like what they did though in the meantime was, at least temporarily, I believe that sale's over now, dropped the Surface Duo's price from $1,500 to $1,000, $999.
Yeah.
And it seems like they leverage that, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do that again in the fall. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised in the fall, 2 things. The Surface Duo 2 permanently drops to that price, and it ships with Android 12L, because that's when we're expecting it, sometime September, October timeframe. Right when the Surface event happens, I wouldn't be surprised they're on stage and they announce it, or they mention it, or the news comes out around that period. And they start to right now, what's going on with the Surface Duo, a lot of people don't understand this. It's called a soft launch. And a soft launch is a marketing term where you get a product out there, but its primary mission is to collect feedback on the experience from its users. And so you can improve it, whether it's a software or hardware for the next version. And this is why there's no advertising for this device outside of like social media, specifically on Twitter, probably on Facebook, but there's no commercials. There's never been a commercial on TV for it. They did do recently kind of a commercial on the UK account. It was the first time I actually saw kind of like an ad It was people going through the forest and with friends and actually focusing on the camera, which was really interesting. But that was the closest thing we've seen to a commercial. But they haven't done any TV spots, nothing in magazines, nothing in carrier stores or anything. And that's because, like I said, it's a soft launch. That's the purpose. They want it out there. They want people to buy it. But they're mostly doing this to collect feedback and to see where they can improve the device. I wouldn't be surprised with Duo 2 in the fall. It comes out with the Android 12L. Maybe they drop the price down to $999. And you don't see a full launch, but you start to see a little bit more getting it out there into the market, and they're going to feel more confident around it. I still don't think you'll see a full launch, a hard launch, until Surface Duo 3.
Yeah.
I think that's when we'll see that happen. But like, this would be a good way to sort of reinvigorate the Duo since we're going so long without a hardware upgrade. But you drop down that price, maybe Android 12L, new experience, polish it up, maybe even offer, I don't know, new color or do something different. You could spice it up for the next year, right, and keep it kind of interesting and relative. But we'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope they continue, with a mid-range option. I wouldn't even be mad if they just got rid of the glass and went with polycarbonate, even on the premium version. But I don't know if they'll actually do that. So,
I've had a few people message me recently actually saying that the Duo 2 seems to be out of stock in a lot of places. Microsoft Store doesn't seem to have it, in the US at least. I'm not sure about other regions. Best Buy doesn't seem to have it. And I'm wondering, maybe they've finally depleted their stock, and I'm probably waiting for more. But the component shortage has slowed things down. Either that, or they aren't going to make more, and they've just finally sold them all. I don't really know the answer to that, but I would be shocked if they didn't start selling more than when they get the chance. Because if they have run out of stock, then that's probably good news for them. Though I guess they have sold a number of them at a loss at this point because they were on sale quite a bit. But yeah, that's super interesting. And yeah, as you mentioned, this fall, Android 12L should sort of reinvigorate the experience quite a bit. I am starting to hear a few things now regarding that experience. Nothing too concrete yet, but if we look at Android 10 and Android 11 on the Surface Duo, they were very much sort of stock Android looking experiences. I'm starting to hear that Android 12L will be the first time Microsoft really puts its design language into the Android OS. So expect to see some blur effects similar to Fluent design, accent colors perhaps, and just a nicer UI as a whole, more fluid animations, and a more coherent / consistent sort of look and feel when compared to Windows 11. I'm not saying they're bringing live tiles or the start menu to Android. It will still certainly be an Android device, but if you look at things like the Notification Center or the Settings app, those will sort of follow the more fluent design language. Which is really nice to see. I kind of said ages ago that I really hope Microsoft embraces Android and puts its own sort of touch on that experience. Because that's what Samsung does, right? Samsung, OnePlus, Nothing. I guess Nothing isn't doing it at this point, but I'm sure they will eventually. They all take Android and they sort of put a lick of paint on it. They give it its own look. And that's all part of the identity of a product, right? Of the phone. Google does nothing to its phones because Google makes Android, but everybody else sort of gives it a coat of paint where they can. Microsoft hasn't done that yet, and with 12L, I'm starting to hear that they are going to start doing that. So I'm super excited to see what that ends up looking like.
Which makes sense because they do position this device as an extension of Microsoft 365, and it's supposed to be a companion device to basically Windows 11 with Phone Link. So the idea that they're going to start to marry those two designs and everything makes sense, especially since they can't do it with Windows Phone anymore. So, yeah, I think that's going to be kind of interesting. I do know that, with the Android 12, I believe, and of course with 12L, part of the changes to that is the idea of like the accent colors you mentioned. I think a part of the operating system now where it bases it like on your wallpaper. It can change it. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see that, a little bit more choice. And the big question, of course, is do we get a little bit more with Microsoft Launcher? The team keeps like kind of mentioning that they have plans.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I guess that's something we'll have to kind of.
I have a feeling that the launcher being as bare bones as it is on Duo is more of a Surface team decision rather than the Microsoft Launcher team. They kind of want to control that whole product and vision and stuff. And Microsoft Launcher is very customizable to the point where you can sort of make it crazy in a number of ways. Except on Duo. On Duo, it's a very stock, very very clean, very minimal experience. And I think that's by design. I think the Surface team said to Launch team, hey, can you like do a version that strips out most of all of that customization stuff? Because we want to control what the product looks like. And what you offer is just doesn't allow us to do that. So
Yeah, you're right. I mean, someone did make the decision, right, to not just add dual screen support, but then strip out everything. But I wouldn't be surprised if some things start to sneak their way back in. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. Someone's asking, and I heard about this too, that on the show Murders in the Building on Hulu in season 2, I believe it's Tina Fey, there's a scene where she's using a Surface Duo 1. They're asking, do you think this was a paid situation or just luck?
It's almost always paid.
Yeah, it depends. I actually did talk to a company recently. I won't name them because I don't know if it was I should make this public. But we're talking about their team who that's all they do is they work with Hollywood to get their products in the shows. And it's a PC company, obviously. And I was talking about the process, and they said it's almost always free.
Interesting.
There is no money being exchanged a lot of times. What it is some companies are just better at working with Hollywood. They actually will have like a group, and that's their job to get these products out there. And they try to sort of, at least this one PC company tries to match what the director wants in that scene. Like, it's a big screen device or it's a small laptop. It looks really modern, that kind of stuff. And they basically work with that director to get the product out there and all this kind of stuff. So it's one of those complicated things where you think there's a lot of money being exchanged, but I don't think there actually is. I think it's sort of free advertising for that company, while also that show gets to use kind of a cool product and maybe don't have to pay for something, right? Because I imagine if you want to use like an iPhone, you probably do have to pay Apple for that, right? Because if this was the case, Apple's going to definitely charge, which is maybe why you don't always see, iPhone or Apple products being used. But so I'm not really so sure if Microsoft is necessarily paying, but Microsoft does have a long history of doing this. I mentioned Always Sunny in Philadelphia, one of my favorite shows. For years had Surface products and Lumia products. There were a lot of shows on CBS that also did this. So Microsoft clearly has a team dedicated to this. It was funny too. I was telling this company like if I ever want to switch careers, and they're like, hey, I know the people, and I was just like, because I love movies, I love tech, why not merge those two things together? Like. So maybe if Dan ever retires.
I was going to say, people wondering if it was an accident. Even if there was no money exchanged, it was no accident. Tina Fey didn't just rock up to set with a Duo in her pocket and go, I'll just hold this in the scene. Directors wouldn't allow it. Everything you see if it's a good TV show or if it's a TV show with any sort of budget / movie, there's usually a sort of set director there who will... Everything you see in the camera has been put there on purpose. It's rarely do you ever see just things actors brought on set to be in the shot.
And I know sometimes they actually have a choice, not the actor necessarily, but they'll have like a table of like PCs or phones, and the director or the cinematographer or whoever, the casting, whoever is in charge of it, basically looks at what they want and they're like, oh, we'll use that. That's kind of cool. And I wouldn't be surprised if like, people start to see Surface Duo, right? Like as an option, be like, oh, that thing is kind of cool. Like, why not show that?
A great tell to see if it's product placement is if they hold the device with the logo on screen.
Right.
It's like,
the logo.
Look at this. Oh, wow. Instead of just like, most people hold their phone like this, right? And that's not very product placementy because you can't see what it is. But if they hold it like this, if they're almost presenting it without actually presenting it, that's when it was put there on purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably part of the deal. Like, hey, you can use our product for free, but you got to show the logo.
Yeah.
Because you see a lot of shows, they'll blur out the logo. Right. I've seen this with, I think, Dell products where they're like...
It's a lot of the time it's Apple stuff as well,
Yeah, you'll see there's like a circle there. Yeah. And it's like they take out the actual like Dell part. So that's a whole other interesting aspect of the industry. Maybe someday I'll get someone who does that stuff on the podcast, we could talk about it. But yeah, if I ever want another career, I think I'm going to try to do that.
I don't know if I can tell this story. Maybe I can. So you know how remember when the Surface Neo showed up in that movie with Ryan Reynolds?
Yes,
I heard
Red
Red
Notice.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was called. But obviously that was in the film, and Microsoft really didn't want it to be at that point because the Neo wasn't coming. So I don't know if this is true. I was never able to confirm it. This was probably just whispers from Chinese whispers basically. But I had heard that Microsoft really didn't want the Neo in that film to the point where the movie makers had to reshoot a number of scenes to sort of remove it. Obviously, they couldn't reshoot every scene, so that's why it shows up in some scenes. But that's also why it runs Android, because they didn't want to sort of advertise it as a Windows thing, because I say it runs Android, it runs something that doesn't look like Windows, because Microsoft would sort of like, listen, we don't want you to put this thing in your movie, but if you have to, try to disassociate us as much as possible. So that's really interesting, and it's sort of a peek behind the curtain of how these product placements work and when they can go wrong. What the famous example of this is with the Nokia 8.3 5G, which was the star product in the James Bond film, the most recent one. But that film was delayed like a year and a half because of the pandemic. So Nokia's flagship product at that point, by the time the film came out, was no longer its flagship product. And that whole deal fell apart because the movie wasn't going to come out in time for the life cycle of the Nokia 8.3. That's just that story just fascinates me. How I bet Nokia was so just annoyed.
Just another example of Nokia's continued downfall. By the way, they did their contract partnership with Zeiss ended. I believe it was this week.
Who did it?
So they're not going to use Zeiss optics anymore in their phones, and apparently they're not doing any more flagships. I mean, I haven't followed a Nokia smartphone.
Yeah,
in years,
they're not doing great in regards to making phones.
It's a shame too. You and I think. Weren't we at it was IFA? We saw a bunch of Nokia phones, right?
Yeah, and honestly, I was a huge fan of their initial sort of run of Nokia
they were kind of
Android
cool.
things. Yeah, I had a Nokia 8, I had a Nokia 8 Sirocco, I had a Nokia 6, I had a Nokia. Did I have any other Nokias? I had a number of them running Android. I loved them all. I thought they were great. But then they started going. I think their first misstep was with the Nokia 9 Pure Pro, whatever it was, the Pure View thing, where they had like a bunch of cameras on the back. That phone was really bad. I never bought one personally, but I knew somebody who did, and he hated that thing. And ever since then, they've not done another flagship. So,
yeah, such a shame. All right, moving on to I believe we're doing reviews. So we had actually quite a few reviews this week. Zach reviewed a desk, but a flagship standing desk with wireless charging built in, which I'm sure he loves.
I do.
So minimalist, so clean, so few wires. So that's called a Flexi Spot QA. That's on the site right now. If you're interested in a new standing desk, he gives it 4 out of 5 stars. We also did review the Lenovo Yoga 7i 14 and 16. Those are to the Gen 7. So I reviewed the Yoga 9i 14. So as you know, the 9i is the premium line. The 7i is the more budget-friendly, a little bit more affordable, but similar laptops. He gives that 4.5 out of 5. Pretty impressive specs there. And plus, you can get that 16-inch option, which you don't get a lot of. You don't get a lot of 16-inch kind of convertibles, which is pretty nice. We also got a review for the TP-Link EAP 610 V2, which is a Wi-Fi 6 access point. If you're looking for affordable wireless extensions, we give that 4.5 out of 5. So I've luckily never needed Wi-Fi extensions where I am, but there are a lot of options out there. So TP-Link, well-known brand, go check out that review. And then we have this is a NAS review for Mitch Edmonds, he loves NAS technology. So Syncology Disk Station DS1522 Plus review. Impressive AMD Ryzen performance with optional 10 gigabyte networking. So if that's in your to-do list to get one of those things, you can do that. We also reviewed the Thrustmaster TX Leather Edition. Man, the name Thrustmaster just does not evoke gaming for me. I know maybe my mind just goes to dark places. But now when you throw in a leather edition, this just does not sound like a PC product, but that is a racing steering wheel. They actually contacted me. They're like, hey, we have some other stuff you want to review. One of them is an Airbus controller system for using with my like Microsoft Flight Simulator, and it's like the whole like yoke and the throttles, and it's like a whole setup that you attach to your desk. And like for the long haul flights, I'm just like, I wish I had the time and energy to get into like Microsoft Flight Simulator, but I think it's just nuts. People are like, all right, Friday night, time to go fly my Airbus. And like, Airbus they're giant passenger planes, right? And like you're going to go on like what, a 4-hour flight, across the United States, and you're just sitting there on your screen. Like, I just find it hilarious that people are like doing that, because to me that, like, if I was doing a flight simulator, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm going to fly like the F-18 or the F-23. I wouldn't necessarily go to passenger airplane, but so there's a Thrustmaster for you. And then I reviewed the, I love this name, Razer Deathstalker V2 Pro. So Razer announced this week 3 new versions of its Deathstalker keyboard. So that's why it's version 2. There's a Deathstalker version 2, Deathstalker V2 Pro, and Deathstalker V2 TKL, the 10 keyless version. So it's a smaller version. So this is the keyboard I was talking about a couple of weeks ago in this podcast I couldn't name. This is a low profile keyboard. So if you like not a lot of travel, something that's similar to a laptop, but it's a little bit more travel than a laptop, this is your keyboard. The Pro version is wireless. The non-Pro version is wired. The wireless has 2.4 gigahertz, their hyperspeed technology, they call it, as well as Bluetooth. And in fact, the Bluetooth has 3 profiles on it. So it has little buttons on the back, and you just hit the button to switch to Bluetooth channel. So you can like use it on your PC, then use it on your phone, maybe use it on your Steam Deck, whatever you want, with just a touch of the button. This also ships with optical keys. So for gaming, obviously, optical and mechanical. Optical are going to be way faster. It's literally like a little beam of light, a little laser that shoots under each key. And as the key and bypasses that line is when it actuates. So it's super accurate and super fast. I like it for typing. It is. This actually comes with linear switches, which when they first sent it to me, I was like, linear. I like clicky keys normally, but the clicky one doesn't come out for a couple months because of shipping issues that they're having with China. But so they sent me the linears. Like, all right, fine. I love the linears on this. So linears are red switches. They're not completely quiet. They do make a little bit of noise. So they found the perfect balance, in my opinion, between the tactile feedback that you want as well as noise reduction. So they're not, I put a sound sample in there so you can actually hear it when I'm typing. But this is the keyboard I'm sticking with now. Like I like low profile. Turns out keyboards with a lot of travel on them, I'm not surprised. I think my fingers are lazy and they just get tired from typing with that much travel.
I tried to use,
where this one's just less effort.
So yeah, I tried to use this Keychron K2 for a little while. I got my fingers really hurt. It started to hurt after using this. So I'm now back using the very old at this point Surface. I don't know what, just Surface keyboard. I don't know what this is called. Like a chiclet style Surface keyboard. I really love this thing as well. It's like low profile. Very quiet to type on, but I just love how, I don't know what it is. I can't describe why I like this keyboard so much, but I just like how it's the same reason why, I don't know why I have one here, but I do. Lots of people love the Magic Apple keyboard, this thing. People love this keyboard, and I can't tell you why people love it, but I see what they're talking about, and it's similar to what the Surface keyboard is. It's just like, it's a really nice keyboard to type on.
Yeah, I think if you do a lot of writing, the lower profiles are definitely going to be better. And it's obviously good for gamers too, for a lot of reasons. And I compare it to the Logitech G915, which came out in 2019. Oh, by the way, so the Pro version is $250. That's obviously very expensive. Yeah, the non-Pro is $200, and the TKL I think is $230. That's expensive, but when the Logitech G915 came out, it too was $250. That's the going price for it. And like I own the G915 because everybody recommended it, and it has its pros. I mean, when it came out, it was very unique, right? But this thing blows it away. The big thing I love about this, and Zach will appreciate, they did a special treatment on the keys, so it resists hand oils and like what's called key shine, right? After you use it for a couple weeks or months, you look at the keys, and your black keys all have like a little shine on them. Like this resists that, and like I've been using it for weeks, and you don't have to wipe it down, and it's a matte black look, the entire keyboard, and it just looks fantastic. And they did laser etched for the lettering, and so you get the chroma that comes through, and it just looks really sharp. I don't know. Like I said, it's my favorite keyboard. It's what I'm using now until something better comes along. But it's gonna be tough to beat this, I think. So that's the Deathstalker V2 Pro. You can go check out that review. I think we also there's also the Nikon Revolution X Pro Xbox controller, which only got 2.5 out of 5 stars. Womp, womp, womp. Oh, and we also reviewed the Falcon Northwest Talon. This is Falcon is a independent PC manufacturer. They do custom rigs basically, and they put it together a rig for us. You're going to pay more for this because you're getting a custom boutique type system, but they do a really solid job with it. They made a custom Windows Central one for us, which is pretty wild looking. But yeah, it's a pretty cool looking desktop, so you can go check it out or order your own. So I think that does it for the reviews. Before I guess we do the Dell XPS interview, we'll talk about Microsoft earnings. We won't go into huge discussion about it, but I'll put it into perspective. So they brought in $51.9 billion total revenue. That's up 12% year over year. The issue was they actually missed their estimates. Their estimate was going to be $52.4 billion, so they missed it just by a bit. And more specifically, the numbers were pretty mixed, right? So the more personal computing division, which is the one we're mostly concerned with here, includes Windows sales, Xbox, and Surface, as well as Bing and search advertising. So that brought in $14.36 billion, which was just below their guidance on that. Surface revenue was up 10%, but that was driven mostly by commercial sales, which is kind of what you expect. The consumer market's going to start to really flatten out, especially with what I call like macroeconomic headwinds, which is basically the looming recession that people are worried about, as well as inflation. But enterprise is going to continue to basically do well with that and buy and replace equipment. And Microsoft's apparently doing pretty well with enterprise when it comes to Surface, which is why they have that Surface for Business, and you see so much effort on that. And it actually is a pretty big moneymaker for them. Windows OEM rev declined 2% due to production shutdowns. What that means is companies were trying to ship laptops and PCs, and they couldn't, so that affected Windows revenue because those licenses are attached to those sales. This is something we definitely saw here. This happened definitely in May. If you recall, we're just now getting some of these laptops that were announced at CES. 12th gen, where we're expecting April, May timeframe to get these laptops, and here we are now, end of July, just getting them. So there's definitely a lot of truth here. So that's one reason why they missed their Windows OEM revenue. And search and news advertising grew 18%, just below the expected 20% projected, which is interesting. Basically, Bing and search is still doing very well for them, which is, like I said, it's interesting because advertising usually is the first to get hit when it comes to reduced consumer spending. Companies start to buy less ads, basically. But they, for things like Surface, they had a 10%, it was up 10%. And they were expecting low double digits. So they just hit that low double digits. So not amazing, but still pretty good year over year. They're growing. They're growing. They're doing what they do every time, which is every quarter they grow a little bit for the Surface, which I think is what they want. They got to keep it kind of balanced out. Now, when it comes to guidance, so this is for the next quarter, this is the important thing, because as long as they're what they say they expect to do is what happens, the stock market will be fine with it. So during its earnings call, Microsoft expected next quarter's revenue for more personal computing to fall between 13 and 13.4 billion. Windows OEM is expected to decline in the high single digits due to continued weakness in the PC market. So they've been noting this since June. They said, but the PC market is softening out. So they do expect decline in the high single digits, so 8 or 9% maybe. Surface revenue is expected to be down in the low single digits. And search and advertising is expected to be up in the mid-high teens. I should also say the same thing kind of happened with Xbox. Xbox was a 6% decrease year over year in Xbox revenue due to lower engagement and limited hardware supply. Xbox hardware revenue was down 11%. The decrease was partially offset by increase in Xbox Game Pass subscribers. Now, interesting, despite this news, like Azure did very well, and some of the other divisions are all doing well as too. But what was interesting is the stock market, despite this is the first time they missed their revenue since 2016. Ever since then, every quarter they've always beat the estimates, which has been really impressive. This is the first time they missed, and usually when that happens, they get punished on the stock market. That hasn't actually happened. Microsoft investors are loving them, partly because their guidance for next quarter is still very strong. So to put this all in perspective, what's happening is, and they're up today 4.72%, and they're up for, the whole week. They've just been going up. They were at 264 earlier in the week, and then after earnings, they're at 281. So they've gone up quite a bit since this. It's just because even though they missed their estimates, there's a lot of confidence in them that they're navigating these what were supply chain issues for some areas, as well as softening demand in other areas, but their corporate enterprise stuff is still doing very well. And so people have faith in Microsoft. And so their stock is doing very, very well. And it looks like they're going to continue to do well. Now, Apple had the same situation. Apple beat estimates. And they were predicting a lot worse for a quarter, but they actually did pretty well. Mac was down 10%, which sounds bad. They say they didn't have enough supply to test demand, which is interesting. So they were dealing with supply chain constraints as well. And they're saying they basically didn't ship enough Macs to know how much demand there was for it. I think you'll start to see that, balance out, though, because I think the market is softening for people buying new PCs. So we'll see what happens. The iPad was also down slightly. Services grew for Apple, but it's a continued deceleration of that growth. So they were like at 27% a year ago. Now they're at 12%. So every quarter they're kind of losing people or not growing very fast. So I think that's an interesting thing to watch. iPhone did slightly better than expected. And I don't know. We'll see with the iPhone 14. Of course, Facebook got hammered this week. They missed their estimates. Amazon did pretty well, and Google did well as well. So it's a mixed market right now, but I think the important thing is it seems like consumer demand is not falling off a cliff, which is what people were really concerned about. And we're not hitting it doesn't look like we're going to hit a recession. I know there's, people are arguing over the internet right now because there's been 2 quarters of decline, but technically that's not the definition of recession. But it looks like things like inflation is coming down. Elon Musk tweeted about that this week because Teslas have gone up dramatically. My car went from, I paid $42,000 for mine when I got it. If I were to buy it today, it would be $50,000. Wow. So, but he's saying now that the prices for their raw materials that they use are coming down, and it looks like inflation is getting under control, which means they could hopefully lower those prices again. So I think hopefully going to the fall, things will be okay. Oh, I should also point out Intel had a terrible quarter.
Yes, they did.
Intel, that's the really big news this week. Let's see what they're down today, because I know it's a lot. So
do we know why that happened? Why they had such a bad quarter? Were they predicting this, or did this come out of left field?
Let's see. Hold on a second. Oh, so they're down 3.9% today. Jeez. Down to $36. Yeah, so that's really interesting. They seem to have both a problem with supply and demand. You're saying some of the supply issue, I just mentioned, right? They couldn't ship 12th gen when they wanted to. I mean, that's obvious. I saw that firsthand. So that affects their bottom line. But they've also seen declines in their server industry and everything. They're saying, but they're also going through a big transition at this point, right? And they just announced this week a big deal to manufacture MediaTek's processors, which is interesting. So this is the thing. Intel announced a while ago that they're going to be opening more foundries and they're going to start making chips for other companies, which is going to be kind of a big business for them instead of making just their own chips. This is what TSMC does. And TSMC had a very good quarter, even though their smartphone sales were basically only like 3%. All their other divisions for like IoT and cars and everything else was way up. So Intel's hoping to kind of get into that for other companies, but it's going to take time. They just announced the CHIPS deal with the U.S. government, which is going to subsidize the manufacturing of new labs or fabs here in the United States for production. That's good so long as they can have demand for using those fabs, right? But they're saying that and I think next quarter, the next 2 quarters, they're expecting also kind of bad results. But they're saying this is kind of the bottom of where they're going to be, because the company is pivoting and changing, and so it's going to take a couple of years for them to do that. They did sell off their drone business as well. In fact, it was Elon Musk's brother that bought that company. Just interesting. Those are the when you see the events replace fireworks, they do those sky drones. That's Intel. That's all their technology.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, they do all that. They did Burning Man, and they've done they've done some of the Olympic stuff, but they sold off that business because I think they're kind of done with it. They spun it off as a separate thing. They did as much as they could. So I don't know. We'll see what happens with the rest of the market. But that's your stock update for this week. I'm going to be a financial guru at some point. Finally, before we get to the interview, I'll just point out also in terms of laptop reviews, I got a lot on my plate, but this is what's come in. We do now have the Lenovo ThinkPad X13S. That's with the Snapdragon 8cx Gen 3. It's finally here. I've been using it all week. It's really good. It's like what I said. It feels like an 11th Gen Core i5 U series processor. The performance is dramatically better than like what's on the current Surface Pro X. I mean, part of it's because it only has a full HD display, so it's not driving as intense graphics, but it feels way different. I feel like this is going to be the game changer for them. Not in the sense of like for consumers necessarily. At least for some consumers, it will be. This stuff is very much an enterprise-focused device. It's for information workers, not for video editing. It's not for gaming. But if you're an information worker who needs like 5G and everything like that, this thing is really awesome. And it gets ridiculous battery life. I use it for 3 days straight, off and on the couch and everything like that before I had to recharge it. So you're not going to get 28 hours, which is what they're quoting. But yeah, you should easily get 10 to 12 hours out of this thing of like real world, like actual hardcore kind of usage. It also recharges quickly. So hopefully that review will be doing that soon. Also got the HP Spectre X360 13.5 in, so it's the updated version of that. They changed the hardware this year, smoothed it out. New 12th Gen U series processor. So that's here with its OLED display. Really nice typing experience. They finally got rid of Zach's. He hates the home row keys that they put on the right-hand side. So they got rid of that this year. It's now just edge-to-edge keys. And I have to admit, it works a little bit better in terms of typing. It feels really good to type on. Got the Dell XPS 13 Plus, of course, which is what we're going to segue into next. And I also have some other Dell stuff. I think those are the big consumer kind of devices. So very exciting stuff. I'm really impressed with everything. It's been hard to choose what to use. But let's turn to the XPS 13 Plus. We did talk to Dell today it's about 38 minutes, the interview. And we go through all the questions about its design, why they made certain choices. And I even asked the question that's been on my mind forever, which is, what does XPS stand for? Which I thought was kind of interesting. But here we go into that interview. Hey everyone, Daniel Rubino here from Windows Central, and we're doing a special interview today talking about the Dell XPS 13 Plus and a little bit about the whole XPS lineup, in fact. And so we have 2 people from Dell here, Nick DiLoretto, who's the Director of Industrial Design for the XPS, Alienware, and G Series. So he's going to be the person who's going to really talk about all that radical new look that's part of the XPS 13 Plus, which I did get my hands on this week, and the review will be coming pretty soon, actually. I'm almost done with it. And we'll also be joined with Randall Heaton, who's the product launch manager for the XPS 13, the whole series, because as you may know, there are actually quite a few XPS 13s now. There's a 2-in-1, there's the regular XPS 13, and then now there's the XPS 13 Plus. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those differences there and about that lineup as well. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. We love having these discussions with you guys because it gives us an opportunity to kind of go deep into these products, talk about why the decisions were made and the process that goes into the designing this stuff. And I just want to start off by giving kind of a little history with the Dell XPS line. Well, I mean, I'll let actually Nick give the full history and maybe Randall as well. But the XPS line has always been the premier premium lineup for Dell's laptops. The XPS 13 really, I would say, you know, broke waves when it went to that Infinity Edge display. That's where like everybody took a step back and said, wow, these guys are really doing something different at this point. And since then, it's always been ranked as one of the best laptops around year after year, and it's gotten better. There was some interesting challenges at first, like with the webcam, which was later fixed, Windows Hello and things added in as the product evolved. And it's been kind of interesting to follow Dell because, as Nick and I were talking about before we started here, uh, you know, like the XPS 13 line tends to be pretty conservative in the fact that they come out with a design, it just blows everybody away, and then you guys keep it for a couple of years with refinements here and there based on customer feedback and production and everything, what's new as far as technology. And this is a little bit different than some other companies. I'm thinking of HP here, who tends to radically alter some of their laptops generation to generation, even though it doesn't necessarily um, feel like the changes are always needed. And I feel like this was Nokia was doing this too back with the Lumia days, where I felt it was unnecessary almost that they kept changing products year after year when they had like really good designs that they should have just iterated on. So I guess Nick, we'll start with you. Can you talk a little bit about that process and sort of Dell's philosophy when it comes to the XPS 13 line, about how you guys design things, and then we can get deeper into the actual XPS 13 Plus.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. This idea that why change in design, and with XPS, we've always taken the position that we'll only change if there's a tangible benefit to our customers. So you look at that XPS 13 shape, which hasn't changed in a while, and you start to look at, well, why is it that shape? Why does it have the angle on the front? Why is there that angle on the back? And all of these things serve an actual customer purpose, right? The angle on the front helps you open uh, the product, and then the angle on the back allows the A cover to not touch the table when you open the product, so we can put lower feet on it, gets the product closer to the ground for a little bit better user experience. And then the wedge shape allows you to pick the product up off the table. So those things, there was no reason to change. Those are still working really well in terms of benefits to the customer. Where you notice the radical change, as you put it this time, was in the user interfaces. In XPS, we're always looking to expand what users can do, and also looking to simplify generation over generation. So you can see that in this generation. We got rid of the what we call the lattice, or the little lattice between the keys. We got rid of the party line for the touchpad. We obviously went from a physical keys for the function row to capacitive function rows. All these things were done deliberately, intentionally, and they had different goals that spoke specifically to the target customer. With this generation of XPS products, we were looking to bring in a more youthful audience. We saw them as the future of the premium market. So we looked specifically at the things that they were trying to do. We noticed that a lot of them were content creators. We knew it was going to be important to provide more power in this particular product. So that led to the change from the physical function row keys to the capacitive ones, all part of a strategy to almost double the power on this XPS 13 to 28 watts from 15 in the last one. And then that maniacal attention to detail and further simplicity was seen on that keyboard. As I mentioned, we got rid of the lattice. That provided more visual simplicity. And then we paired that with the new touchpad, where we got rid of the lines around the touchpad. What we realized is that navigating is a very tactile experience. It's not one that you necessarily, it's not a visual one. So having visual delineation for the touchpad wasn't that important, especially we're at a touchpad that's of such a size now, where you just simply move your fingers to the center of the product, and you can go have that great navigation experience. All of these things led to a more simple product. And when we were talking to this younger generation, they said that they wanted something that allowed them to just focus. So that visual simplicity was part of giving them a product where they have a great screen image and there's very little distraction from that. Oh, you're on mute.
Of course, I knew I was going to forget to unmute myself. You brought up some really good points regarding probably what are the most controversial aspects of this laptop, which is the keyboard, the trackpad, and those function keys. And we'll start with the keyboard first, especially because I've been using this laptop for the last week, and people immediately look at that keyboard and the trackpad and they think that's going to be unusable. That's going to be really problematic to use. And I was like, even before I got to use, I was telling people, I'm like, well, Dell did research on this. It's not like they just designed it in one version and just gave it to people and said, we'll take the risk and see what happens. And I know you guys actually did try, a few different versions. Maybe you can talk about that after this. But I will say that in using this laptop, I had zero issue with the keyboard and the trackpad. I don't think people realize, especially the trackpad, you mentioned how big it is, but just how much muscle memory comes into using a trackpad. Like when you put your hands on the keyboard and your thumbs just line up there in the center, it's right there where the trackpad is. Same if you're going to use your index finger. I never had any like, oh, I'm off the trackpad and it's not working. And the keyboard isn't just usable. It's one of the best keyboards I've actually used on a laptop. Again, I don't think people appreciate the keys look very flat with no gaps between them, but they're not actually flat. There's little divots on them. So your fingers can actually feel where they're going, but in the travel is still there too. And I just thought using this as a laptop to write and do work on, I had not only no problems, but it was thoroughly enjoyable. And for those who don't know, the trackpad is haptic. And if you listen to this podcast, I have very strong feelings on haptic trackpads. I think they're the future, and I'm, glad to see them here. This is a different type of haptic, though. We've seen the Sensel one is used in the Surface Laptop Studio, and it was also Sensel used in Lenovo's ThinkPad Titanium X1 Yoga. This is a different company and collaboration I believe you guys are doing with this one. Can you talk a little bit about that trackpad and the choices behind it and feedback you guys have been getting?
Sure. Yeah. So the trackpad is a little bit different in its technology. It uses 10 piezo-based haptic motors to provide very sort of accurate haptic feedback and very localized haptic feedback. A lot of other solutions use a larger LRA motor, and that's just one motor, and it vibrates anytime you hit anywhere on a trackpad. Obviously, that feedback can't be as specific because it's just one motor. This, and also if you're navigating, you'll feel the whole palm rest vibrate if you put your other hand on the touchpad while you're using those types of haptic trackpads. This provides very localized and very specific feedback. As far as the choice to not have any delineation goes, we did look at a number of different models when we went through the process, and through looking at sort of lines, or we looked at light up lines, or we looked at a debossed area. When we go through and we look at the benefit to the customer, it just wasn't there because you don't actually need that to have a great navigation experience.
Yeah, it's funny. Lenovo actually has a new line of laptops out. I believe it's the Z series, and they use haptic trackpads on those. And I remember talking to them. They do delineate the area, and they did the reverse. They did experiment without the border, but they decided to, I guess, go with the more conservative, approach and actually put the lines on there. Even though, as you mentioned, it's technically not needed. That entire like palm rest area is actually glass, if I'm correct, right?
On our product?
That's correct. It's all Gorilla Glass.
It's all Gorilla Glass. Yeah, it feels like I love the feeling of it. Traditionally on these laptops, you're going to get either a metal deck, or you guys used to use the rubberized and the carbon fiber type layer too. But this feels really premium on there, and so it's nice to know it's Gorilla Glass. obviously, I don't think you want to ever drop an XPS 13, but that's something to be, I think, long term to think about. But I also like the edging on this laptop done with a little metal frame around it. It looks really nice. Randall, can you talk a little bit about the XPS 13 line and like, how it's been doing for Dell and how it's, the product line has evolved, and specifically also like, why are you doing the plus in addition to the XPS 13? I think some people, especially when the XPS 13 Plus came out, was like, oh, that's a new XPS 13. And we're like, no, no, no. It's like, we think there's going to be another one coming. It's going to be the regular XPS 13, but updated itself with new technology. So can you talk a little bit about that decision and like, the rationale for that?
Sure. Well, you made the point before several years ago when we brought along the Infinity Edge display, where we had three-sided Infinity Edge with the really thin borders. And then, of course, we had what was colloquially known as the nose cam. The camera was loaded at the bottom. Um, we knew that wasn't the ideal location, but to get that look and to get that thin profile, that was the only place that we could fit it at the time. But we knew longer term we were going to have solutions to be able to move it up to the top. And so part of this is moving in a direction, taking the technology pieces that are available now, but also looking into the future. We started doing the design for the XPS 13 Plus, I want to say the first concept for 3, maybe even 4 years ago. So we knew long ahead of time we were going to make this change. We had just that one 13-inch product. We'd had some 2-in-1 devices at some point or another as well. But the 2-in-1 devices they were clamshell devices. They were laptops first and foremost, and then they were tablets kind of secondhand. So as we moved forward, we said, okay, what do we want to do? One of the requests we constantly get from customers, and I think this is as much a future-proofing thing as anything else, is they want as much performance as they can get. Um, Now, to get more performance, there's more heat in the box. You typically have to make it a little bit bigger with the technology we currently have. So we thought, okay, do we want to shift this entire line to something a little bit more powerful, or do we kind of keep the focus on the mobility? So at that point, we thought, okay, well, maybe there's more than one product that can be suited here. And so we said, okay, what are kind of the different scenarios that people are using this product for? As someone who wants kind of an everyday carry, make it as light as possible. It has good performance, but not kind of top end performance by any means. Not something you want to do any kind of intensive encoding or encoding on or something like that. Um, but that's kind of our everyday laptop. That's the standard XPS 13. We also wanted to kind of push the envelope a little bit further with performance, and that's where the XPS 13 Plus came in. And the Plus is supposed to imply the greater performance, but it's not just the performance. It's all these additional new interfaces we have: the seamless glass haptic touchpad, the latticeless keyboard, the touch function row at the top. All those pieces go in there together, and those also kind of go into that performance story as well. That touch function row at the top, it's a thinner profile than what we would have done if we would have used mechanical keys there. So we're using that extra space by having that thinner profile to have a more robust thermal solution. So we're able to put a more powerful processor in the box. So really it's, instead of having one solution that fits all in this 13-inch space, let's start dividing it up depending on what customer wants, whether that extra performance, that's future proofing, maybe just the ID itself that they really like. That's what the XPS 13 Plus is for. Then you've got the standard XPS 13, which is your everyday carry. Great performance. It's a little bit thinner and lighter than this one, but still gives good everyday performance with what we see people are using their notebooks for. And then of course, we have the XPS 13 2-in-1, which is the detachable, so you can use it strictly as a tablet, or it can be a primary everyday laptop for you as well.
Yeah, that was a really interesting change. I was actually surprised by that. I actually really like the XPS 13 2-in-1, the clamshell, the original one that you guys had. I thought it was a fantastic design. I remember you guys did a lot of work on that. That had a brand new Intel chipset at the time. It was like the smallest motherboard, one of the smallest motherboards created for a laptop. And you guys switched it up for this time around, which was a big change. And now, as you mentioned, it's a tablet with a keyboard that attaches. I mean, are you guys seeing, I presume, more demand for the tablet type experience versus the flipping around? Because we've seen the 360 design sort of become the default for convertibles, and only a few go down the tablet route. But you guys kind of took a different approach here.
Yeah, well, I think what we found is we've had many different iterations of 2-in-1s on the XPS over the years. And ultimately, at one point, we had something called the XPS 11. It was a solid surface keyboard. It was a really good tablet, but people really weren't using it that much for a tablet because it had the solid, but the solid surface keyboard wasn't a great solution either. And so we decided, okay, let's bifurcate this. A lot of times these devices are heavy on consumption. And so we wanted to make a great consumption device. And if you have the weight of a keyboard on there all the time, then that's not always necessarily a great consumption device. You got to carry that around as well. At the same time, there's more and more performance in these tablet only or tablet focused devices. And so if you want that capability to do kind of the regular productivity, office, Outlook, email, things of that nature, then that attachable keyboard is a great solution. So depending on what you're looking for, there is no single solution that is great for everybody. And so what we're trying to do, especially on a 13-inch space, is have a full spectrum, something that is as mobile as possible with a detachable 2-in-1, all the way to this high performance XPS 13 Plus. And in the middle, we've got kind of your standard traditional XPS 13 laptop as well.
Nice. Nick, I have a question regarding the display on the XPS 13 Plus. It's a fantastic display. I have the, I guess it's the UHD Plus, or I don't know. No, I don't have the UHD Plus one. I have the one that's below that. You guys actually have three types of displays, I believe, for that. Um, but one thing that was interesting that's kind of missing is it's only a 60 hertz display where we're seeing a lot of companies do 90 and 120. I'm wondering what's was the decision behind there? Was there just not demand, or is the technology just not there yet, or was it concerns over battery life since those do use much more power?
Yeah, I'll let Randall go ahead and take that one.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest single factor there is the battery life. That extra capability of the higher frequency, it is useful in some applications, absolutely. We are seeing more and more demand, but it does take more battery life. And these are our most mobile devices, our 13-inch products on the XPS side. So I wouldn't be surprised that sometime in the future we added that capability or maybe variable refresh rates. There's a lot of technology in there that actually will slow down the refresh rate in certain situations to save power. And since these are primarily mobile first products, I think that was our biggest concern. Now, if you look over to our Alienware or gaming side, absolutely we enable that. There's some very direct performance benefits that are very relevant today. I think it's a great place there. But for XPS, I don't think we're quite ready for that. As the technology advances and there are more efficiencies in how that extra refresh rate is applied, I think we'll probably see it come into more mainstream notebooks and probably the XPS line as well at some point in the future.
Yeah, I think it's something we're all kind of waiting for, which is right now, as you mentioned, the displays default to 60 and then they can ramp up to 90 or 120. This is a feature now built into Windows 11. And as long as the drivers work and everything like that, it helps. But the better solution, which I haven't seen yet, is ones that drop below 60 hertz. So if you're looking at a static image or a simple web page, the refresh will be much lower. And hopefully we'll see those in the next couple of years. But I think that would be the really kind of nice game changer for this technology, because as much as I love the 90, 120 hertz and it looks great, specifically 120, almost 90 hertz, I'm not sure it's even worth it because of the changes as much. But 120, you really start to notice it a little bit more. But it definitely impacts battery life. And I know at least on the XPS 13 Plus, you guys have, between that processor and the battery and just the size of the device, because you mentioned it's a plus, but it's not really bigger than the XPS 13. It's not like a larger device. And for those who aren't aware, the XPS 13 Plus is running the Intel 12th Gen P series processors, whereas the XPS 13 is running the U series. And to put those in perspective, the XPS 13 U series, I fully expect that chip to be faster than last year's 11th Gen U series, mostly because of the more cores you're going to get. And then the P series, and this is the important thing, I don't think people appreciate how powerful the P series is now. It will easily beat an 11th Gen H series, what used to be the 45-watt chips in terms of performance, mostly because you're getting so many more cores with these chips. And it's really a huge step up in that performance, which I think is really impressive. The difference being, of course, most H series laptops have a dedicated discrete GPU, and you're not getting that here. Instead, you're using Iris Xe. Who's the person to talk to about thermals? Because I know thermals, Randall, you touch upon this quite a bit, but this was really important regarding the function keys. You mentioned that already. some people thought you're doing that just to be cool, like, oh, look, they look nice. And they do, they look super futuristic. But people are like, oh, Apple tried that. It didn't work, but Apple did it because they actually thought it was going to be cool. Where you guys are doing it because they were thermal constraints and it gave you that extra space. I was wondering if you could talk about the challenges there. Like I said, this laptop isn't bigger than a traditional 13. In fact, it's extremely tiny.
Yeah, the difference between the 13 and 13 plus as far as thickness is just a couple millimeters, so it's not a huge difference. But you carry that around every day. It's a couple tenths of a pound difference there as well. You'll notice that, maybe not just real casually, but over time it's there. And so, that was really kind of what our goal. We didn't want to beef this 13-inch product up so it looked like a gaming box, very thick. We wanted to still keep it thin. And so we had some goals as far as how thick it could go. At the same time, you're right, we put this P series processor in there, which is a 28-watt processor, and we needed to make sure we could run it at full performance. And so we said, okay, what are the different things that we can shrink? We looked at shrinking the travel of the keyboard. We tried that. We didn't really like the way that the keyboard feels as good. That threshold, we actually have 1 millimeter of travel, which is pretty standard across the board. There are some keyboards, especially on the commercial side, that have more travel than that, but anything less than about 1 millimeter of travel, people really start noticing there's a difference. And so we didn't want to lose that. So we looked at other options. We don't have a ton of ports on the box because the ports also take some space in the side as well. Also, we have vents on the back, and depending on where we set the hinges, you either narrow that space that the vents have, or we can widen it up. And that's one of the reasons we have less ports on here. We wanted to kick those hinges on the back as wide as possible, so we have much venting in the back as possible. And that's where the venting is. So that's where we really need that space. And so we use the shrinkage of the kind of Z height, the height of where those touch function row is, by going to this just a touch row instead of a mechanical solution. And that's mainly taken up by some thermal fins that use to help push the heat out of the box on the back there. So a lot of that venting is going to the back, and we're making the maximum use of that space right there to make it happen.
Nice. Yeah. For those listening, you may not know that the XPS 13 Plus only has 2 Type-C Thunderbolt ports, one on each side, and no headphone jack. But you guys did include in the box the adapter for Type-C to a headphone jack and an adapter for Type-A, which is nice because I know that was like up in the air when I was first briefed on this product. It was like, yeah, we think we're going to be putting in there, but we're not sure. But I can say in the box, you do get both of those adapters, which goes a long way. Personally, I haven't used wired headphones on a laptop in many years, but I know that's still a controversial thing, which is but it was one of those necessary moves, I think, as you mentioned on this laptop. It did give you that extra space. Nick, going back to design, you mentioned that some of this started back in 2018 for the XPS 13 Plus. Can you just walk us through that process of like how you guys even start off about like what you're going to do and what those changes are going to be, especially because, we said you guys stick with the design for a couple of years. So you have to be a little bit forward looking, knowing what the technology that's kind of coming down the road and you're going to be able to build around so that it's not obsolete. So I don't know, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I mean, all of our designs start with a customer, right? So we did redefine the whole new target with this product. We wanted to target this young metropolitan customer, started looking at what they wanted to do and the experiences that they wanted to have. And that kind of led us to some of these answers that we wanted to pursue. And there were some bigger goals that we had as well, right? Every time we go through and redo these products, there's constant refinement that happens. We wanted to make the products more sustainable than they were in the last generation. So when you look at the last XPS 13 Plus or last XPS 13 versus the new XPS 13 Plus, you'll notice that simplification. We have no polished diamond sidewall on this new generation. Instead, it's one consistent bead blast finish. So we reduced finishes, but we elevated the finish that remains. If you feel the two next to each other, this one's much smoother in the way it feels. But by getting rid of that second anodized step, it allowed us to boost yield rates, which means that we have less waste. It's better for the environment. We're also using low carbon aluminum in these products, which means that the carbon's sourced from sources that use renewable energy like hydropower. So there were some big goals that weren't technology related that we also brought into this. There was other things that we wanted to do, other small changes. You mentioned the Gorilla Glass on the touchpad and the capacitive function row. We worked to make that even smoother than it was in the previous generation. There's a lot of small things that kind of add up to this overall, what we call this tactile journey and experience of the product that we wanted to get right. Other things like the keyboard, that was something that took us a while as well. When we got rid of the lattice, we wanted to be really sure that we were still providing an excellent typing experience for our customers. And that took quite a bit of exploration. We made a lot of different 3D prints, playing with the key pitch or the distance between the keys, and then looking at keyboard dish as well, something else that you mentioned earlier. All of these things kind of came together to create the right experience. At the end of the day, we ended up building 3 different working keyboards, and it's not easier to build a prototype keyboard. The same amount of engineering as a production keyboard has to go into each individual keyboard prototype that you build. So that took quite a bit of work to go do. And at the end of the day, we ended up with a keyboard that, like Randall said, has the same amount of travel as the previous generation, but we enlarged the keycaps so you have a bigger striking surface. We tried a few different dishes or concavities in each key till we got the right thing. Ultimately, what we found is that when we removed the lattice between the keys, we had to add slightly more dish so that your fingers could find a home. So on the XPS 13, the dish on those keys is 0.1 millimeters. On these keys, it's 0.3 millimeters. It's a subtle change, but it makes a big difference. All of these things were highly considered. And it got us to a result where even though the interface looks radically different, as you mentioned, when you go and use it, it doesn't behave radically different. It still feels like a really great laptop input experience.
Yeah, I really like that keyboard. I think it looks really fantastic. And you guys just keep, the displays, of course, really nice. Is the display Sharp IGZO, or are you using OLED now on these?
So we're using both actually. So we do have an OLED
Okay.
panel, and then we do have, Sharp is one of our suppliers of the panels that we're using as well, and they really do great on their power efficiencies. And so we usually work with Sharp quite for some of our newer panels because they do great from a power efficiency standpoint, as well as the brightness and color gamut, which is really kind of what separates some of the premium panels from kind of the everyday panels. Is how bright can you get it, and also have it remain efficient at the same time with good color gamut.
Yeah, the Sharp IGZOs I've always enjoyed because they found in my opinion, a nice balance between OLED and what the LCD IPS displays were at the time. It was somewhere in between. And a lot of that had to do with OLED when it first came out. It was too intense, and it was like, it looked amazing the first 30 seconds. You're looking like, oh my God, it's crazy. But then after an hour, you're like, this is too intense. And I've noticed this generation of OLEDs across manufacturers a lot more tamed down in terms of the contrast. So you still get those deep blacks and that color punch, but it's not as like intense as your smartphone is, allowing it to be looked at for longer periods of time. For me, eye fatigue is a big deal. You guys did the anti-reflective displays for a long time, which I'm a huge fan of. So I think that's really kind of neat. And I guess we'll go to Nick for this, but I also want Randall's input. What technologies in laptops do you think are sort of the most interesting ones to watch right now or in the future? Is it displays? Is it going to be around the processors? 5G connectivity. You guys have been pretty also conservative of offering always connected PCs. I will say the 2-in-1, I believe, does offer a 5G option, which is kind of nice. That's, I believe, a first for XPS 13. But Nick, do you have like any sort of technologies or materials that you guys are interested in using? I know you guys use some crazy materials for the thermals. I don't know. What are you saying?
As far as materials go, I think in the short term, we are always looking to provide the best materials possible for any given task. In the previous generation, you saw us use carbon fiber and glass fiber. In this generation, we've moved to glass, still using aluminum. Aluminum CNC, I think, will remain one of the better materials to make laptops out of for quite some time. It's got a really great combination of strength and being lightweight. As far as new technologies, I think there's a lot of interesting new screen technologies coming that might allow for some really great interface experiences in the future, everything from bendable OLEDs, excited about micro LED displays. I think there's some interesting potential in what kind of experiences you can give the customer through some of these.
Nice. And Randall, what are you watching in technology for laptops that has your interest peaked?
So I'd say three things. Definitely the panel. There's a lot of opportunities out there that the panel probably consumes more power than just about anything
Right.
else, depending on what you're doing with the notebook. And so the efficiencies you can get there are great, especially as you can improve the visual experience. Two other things are very subtle. There's new Wi-Fi standards coming out that, Wi-Fi's been around for so long. What's the big deal? It's pretty fast as it is now, but also interacting with the Bluetooth aspect of it and your ability to connect different devices together more seamlessly. That's going to be really nice from a user experience. And then the last item is probably battery technology. We've been making small gains in battery technology for a long time. Things get a little bit more efficient. We're using more energy dense cells than just about anybody else in the market right now in our XPS products, and they're a little bit more expensive, but they are just kind of small steps forward as far as efficiency. When we get to the point that the energy density is even greater in there, it can make the products lighter. It can give you a lot more flexibility in how you're structuring the product, and also can give you that all-day battery life, which sometimes is hard to achieve depending on what you're trying to accomplish with your notebook.
I guess that leads me to a question that's near and dear to me, which is, when are you guys going to jump on, or will we ever get an XPS laptop that's also ARM powered? We're starting to see, a few more ARM PCs. I'm trying the Snapdragon 8cx Gen 3 right now, and for me, I think it's a game changer in terms of performance. I feel like for the first time, this feels like a normal consumer level product. It feels like an 11th gen Core i5 to me in terms of overall performance. But you guys have been pretty conservative when it comes to adopting that technology. I assume you guys are looking at it, but have decided it's just not there yet. Do you think that that period will be coming up sometime for the XPS line or any other line, or are you guys going to go like enterprise first, do you think?
Well, I say you're right. We are always looking at the technologies, ARM-based and otherwise as well. We're always considering them. I won't comment on anything directly, but we're always having that under consideration. I think some of the gap with the ARM stuff is getting better and better, and so the likelihood is going to increase more and more. Whether that's a year down the road or 10 years down the road, it's probably somewhere in between there at some point.
Got it. Will we ever see an XPS 15 2-in-1 again? I actually still have that laptop, which I know is an interesting experiment. I'm not a huge fan, I think, of 15-inch convertibles or even now 16-inch. They seem to be very much the exception. But obviously, I know some people still ask about that. But presumably, the feedback and consumers just didn't want a convertible that size. Would that be accurate?
That's true. I mean, and we had some definite big fans of that XPS 15 2-in-1. We had an
Yeah.
XPS 18 all-in-one here a few years back. That was essentially a large tablet. It had a battery as well.
Yep.
The market acceptance as a whole wasn't great for it, but there were some very diehard fans and customers that love the product. And I think that's what we're kind of trying to balance there. What's the next item right there? We want customers to love our products, and doing something unique usually gives us that opportunity. But we also have to be able to sell enough of them to make it worthwhile. And so we won't see those as often, but I think we continue to want to push the envelope with XPS on different form factors and different opportunities like that. So we'll continue to look at opportunities like that going forward. But yeah, the 2-in-1 seemed to be a big push for a 2-in-1, but the actual usage of it, especially on those larger screens, people just much preferred to have the clamshells from their wallet perspective, what they were wanting to buy.
Got it. And I also probably have to ask this question since a lot of the hardcore nerds are going to want to know. Intel versus AMD. The XPS line has pretty much always been Intel, although I believe that XPS 15 2-in-1 had an AMD partnership with Intel. Are you guys, looking at AMD ever in putting as far as using those chips, or are you guys thinking you're going to stick with Intel for the foreseeable future?
So we're always going to choose what we think is the best solution for our customers. AMD does some great stuff right now. Intel does as well. I think AMD has made some great gains against Intel recently, and that always brings the conversation up. We definitely consider whatever we think the best solution is for our customers. To date, with the exception of that XPS 15 2-in-1, which had a combination of an Intel processor and an AMD graphics solution put together on the same silicon chip, that was kind of an interesting thing, and it was really neat what they did there. I think we're going to continue to look at opportunities as they pop up, but no commitment in anything at the moment.
Got it. Nick, any final thoughts you want to share with us on the development of the XPS 13 Plus and expectations for going forward?
Oh, expectations going forward. We're always working on really great things, and we're always looking to push the envelope. XPS exists at Dell to kind of serve as a guide on how to move forward within the computing industry. So XPS will continue on its mission to look at where we can push next. As far as the XPS 13 Plus process goes, I think it was one of the most exciting projects I've been involved in working on the XPS brand. I think we did a lot of new things there that all kind of came together to create a great result. Everything from those interface elements that you mentioned to the things you don't see. Like we were able to get a 4-speaker audio solution in the XPS 13 Plus. That was a first for the XPS 13 Plus. So better audio than we've ever had before. And we also, on the LCD panels, were able to remove the cover glass to get the product to be a little bit lighter. So a lot of really fun things and a lot of different things in that product. And you can expect to see a lot of more innovations out of the next XPS 13 products that we release.
And I don't know who can answer this, maybe Randall. What does XPS stand for?
So I've been at Dell for over 20 years. At one point, XPS was the Extreme Performance System. This is when we were doing desktop. This is like 20 plus years ago that this happened. Then the brand kind of got shelved for a while, and we brought it back. It doesn't have a specific meaning right now. It's not performance, although we make great performance machine. It's just our premium brand. We like the way it looks. We like the way it sounds, and so we kind of kept that and resurrected that brand. It's something that customers 20 years ago, when we first were putting together these desktop FPS systems, they connected with. So we wanted to continue to have something that customers would connect with.
Well, it definitely sounds cool. I have to admit that XPS is just just kind of rolls off the tongue, and NetX is always a cool thing to have in any brand name. So, well, at least that's interesting. I'm glad I asked that question. All right, guys. Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Randall, for joining us. It was a great conversation about the XPS 13 Plus. We do have the review coming up on Windows Central very soon, so tune into my thoughts for that. As always, tune to our podcast, which it's recorded Fridays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time on our YouTube channel. And thanks to Dell for allowing these two gentlemen to join us. We're very much appreciative of that.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
So there you are. That was our interview with the Dell XPS, or a couple of people from the Dell XPS team. Really insightful stuff there, Dan.
Thank you. It's funny, too, because as Zach and I were talking about before the interview, he's like, all right, you have your questions ready? And I'm like, oh, I don't have questions like planned. I'm just going to start talking to them and see where it goes. That's how I do interviews. I don't have the patience to do proper questions. Nice. But yeah, some interesting stuff. Hopefully, we did one of these with Lenovo a few months ago. If you haven't heard that one already, go check that out. But I'd like to do more of these with companies when we try to do that, because I think it does offer the other side of the coin, talking about, what goes into these laptops and designs and why they do certain choices. Like, the thing about the ports, obviously only 2 ports or the 2 Type-C ports is not a lot on this laptop, although it's not completely unusual either. But the explanation behind it, I had no idea, right? That it allowed them to put the hinges out further, which then allowed better ventilation. Like, I would have never made that connection. But it goes to show you just how, important every little millimeter counts in these devices. So there you go, though. Hopefully I'll have that review done early next week for you guys. Spoiler alert, it's pretty positive. My only gripes a little bit is going to be the P series processors. Battery life is okay, but even there, one thing we didn't get to talk about in that interview that we did after was the power profiles that Dell has. So as some of you know, some companies have their own separate software, and it allows you to switch power profiles. That's not unusual. XPS 13 Plus has that too. In fact, they revamped it. But it's different, and I'll go into depth in this in the review, because the power profiles actually dramatically alter the performance and the experience of this device. So out of the box, it comes optimized, obviously, and so it's going to give you kind of the best of everything. But there's two modes. One is quiet and one is cool. Quiet obviously doesn't run the fans much, but they say the temperatures, make it a little bit warmer. It also brings down the performance a little bit. I feel like it's maybe 20%. And then there's a ultra mode, which lets the fans go, and the fans are very quiet, so it's not like it gets very loud. But then it goes to its full 28 watts. So if you want to do something like video editing or something like that, you throw it into there. And what's interesting is I've been running it on cool and or quiet, because that's all I need for most of my, like, what you call knowledge worker type tasks. And the P series is more than enough for that at those levels, in which case it would get more battery life because you're not running the full water to the processor. So talking about battery life on this device is going to be a little bit tricky and nuanced, especially because the battery test I keep running keeps failing at the last like 10%, which if you don't know, if you run a battery test, they run for, well, the whole length of the device, so 6 to 10 hours. And then to have it fail at the end is, I don't know, it's pretty funny. So stay tuned for that, though. It'll be an interesting discussion, and we'll do that on the next podcast as well. On that, we'll turn to our last thing, which is Thing of the Week. Zach, you have one of those?
Oh, no, I didn't even prepare for one. No, I don't have one. Do you?
Yeah, actually do. We were talking about this earlier. On Hulu, there's a show called The Old Man, and it has a great cast: Jeff Bridges, John Lithgow, Aaliyah Shawkat, a couple other people. But it's if you like the Bourne series, it's like that, although it stars Jeff Bridges, who is awesome. But it's a really good espionage, thriller, action, spy series. It's about 7 episodes long. I think each episode's about an hour. But it's done so well. The acting is phenomenal. The cinematography is great. And it's a really cool story. It definitely worth the time. I was more than impressed by it. I haven't finished yet. I still have 1 or 2 episodes, but just a really cool story. So if you're into that, check that out. And then finally, as some of you guys know, if you follow me on Twitter, my doggie shows up tomorrow. She left Texas last night. I threw up some 2 photos of her in her bio, so you can go check it out there. And I'll be, of course, posting more photos, but very excited. The hardest thing has been trying not to adopt a second one before we even get the first one. But I think right now we'll stick with 1, but yeah, we'll see what happens, but I'll keep you guys posted on that. Other than that, now we'll turn to Q&A with the audience. So if you have questions, you can start asking those into the comments section. If you're listening to this recorded, of course, you don't get to hear that section, unfortunately, but you can join us every Friday at our regular time at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time on our YouTube channel. Follow me at Twitter, Daniel_Rubino, Rubino, and follow Zach at ZACBOW. Oh my God, ZACBOWDEN. It's been a long day. As always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care, everyone.
Excuse me. Okay, if you have any questions, now is the time. I see one already. What should we expect from the Surface October event? So I don't think anything's locked in just yet, but I think we're at a point now where I can sort of almost confidently say what we are expecting. Surface Pro 9. Excuse me, my cough's come back. Surface Pro 9 with Intel 12th Gen and ARM chips. I continue to hear that Microsoft is planning to merge the Pro X and the Pro 9 branding, and so there will be a singular Pro 9, and it will be offered in Intel or ARM or SQ3, I guess, variants. SQ3, of course, will be based on the Snapdragon 8cx Gen 3, which, as far as I'm aware, is pretty good. Dan, am I wrong on that? How's the 8cx Gen 3 going?
You're right, and if they do follow this route of sort of merging the product lines, I think it totally makes sense, because the performance on this thing is going to be much better, and I think more you're not going to notice as much complaints between users. So I'll be really curious if they actually follow through with that.
Yep, there's also the Surface Laptop 5. I don't know if it'll be a 4 Plus or if it'll be a 5, but I am expecting 12th Gen Intel chips in there as well, and AMD Ryzen 6000 series chips. Obviously, Surface Custom Edition is normal with the AMD stuff. For the Pro 9 and the Laptop 5, I believe they will both be P series Intel chips. That may have changed. That they were certainly prototyping that earlier this year. Perhaps they came to the conclusion that the U series would be better suited for maybe the Pro 9. I don't know. I really don't know there. So we'll have to wait and see. But it will certainly be 12th gen. We just don't know if it will be U or P series in the Pro 9. I think it will almost certainly be P series in the laptop 5. I think it would be a mistake for them to not do that. Regarding anything else, Surface Studio 3 is the, I guess, almost wild card. I have heard that they will kind of want to get a Surface Studio 3 out this year. I don't know anything about it other than it might have an 11th gen chip on the inside, which isn't too great, but I guess we'll see. And then Surface Earbuds 2, which I also don't know anything about, but those are possible for this fall as well. Did I miss anything? No, because there's no Surface Go this year. There's no Laptop Studio this year. There's no Laptop Go. We just had that.
No Surface headphones.
No Surface headphones, as far as I'm aware. And yeah, that's that's basically it. The lineup. It's not too many things. I guess the other thing we don't really know is what will they call the next Surface Pro? Will it be Surface Pro 9 or will it be Surface Pro 10? Because it is the 10th anniversary of Surface, and companies like to skip the number 9. So who knows?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I think I'm definitely very excited for the Surface Pro. I love the Surface Pro 8 and the Pro X, and the idea of those two things merging, I think is really interesting. Even if they don't, I'm excited about both devices because of the performance upgrades that they're going to get. If they put a P series into that, the Pro, that's going to be a serious device for performance.
Oh yeah, we're also expecting Project Volterra, right? The mini desktop arm thing,
right,
which has already been announced, but that probably won't start shipping until October timeframe as well. So yeah, Microsoft will have a desktop Surface PC out this year. That's like unbelievable, but they actually are shipping one, which is crazy. Any dates for 12L on the Duos? No exact dates yet. I need to get some water. No exact dates yet. As far as I'm aware, they're aiming for October. So sometime in October or maybe November is probably looking likely.
Do you think Microsoft will continue to rely on the Amazon App Store, or will Microsoft start to host Android apps within the store itself? I think for now, Amazon. I don't see them going Android. I don't see the advantage necessarily them doing the other way, because they would need to get app developers to do that. You got to see adoption first of Android, the subsystem, people using it. I haven't used it. I used it once, maybe. So if people start using it, maybe they'll explore that. But I think it's too early now to, to why would they bother?
Yeah, I could see it happening if they plan to sort of expand their Android offerings, because it would be interesting for them to host Android apps in the Microsoft Store and then launch its own Android app store on Android. If Microsoft wanted to go after Google Play services, that could be one way for them to do that. Obviously, if they want to, who knows if they actually want to do that. But if they wanted to do that, that would be one way of going about it. But yeah, you're right. As of now, it is all Amazon, and there are no plans to host on the Microsoft Store.
There is the interesting theory, if you go down that route, that with Android 12L and the future development of those apps, they would be technically able to run on like a Surface Pro, right? Just because they would expand. You just want to have the a physical divide in them, but they would still obey the foldable. They'd be treated like a foldable display that doesn't fold, in which case that's kind of the advantage of 12L. And people kind of forget sometimes this with Chrome OS. It's also a way for Google to get basically full screen apps and apps to run, Android apps to run on Chrome OS that don't look like smartphone apps, right? But that could work for Microsoft too. But that said, like I said, the Android emulation stuff, people, if you've tried it, you're not going to be probably as excited about it because the performance just isn't amazing. Like I know people are like, oh, they can finally do a Windows phone and just do the Android emulation. I'm like, dude, running a Windows operating system plus Android emulation, like with a mobile processor, it's going to not be awesome.
Yeah.
But we'll see what happens down the road.
I hope they launch a 16-inch version of the Surface Laptop Studio this year. That's the one I'm waiting for. There will be no Surface Laptop Studio of any kind this year, so do not get your hopes up for seeing one this fall. That is not on the docket. Earliest for the next Surface Laptop Studio would be next spring. That could be pushed back to next fall, given the ongoing component issues from the factories. But yeah, last I heard was the next Surface Laptop Studio is targeting spring, and I don't know if they're going to do a 16-inch version. I haven't heard that they are for the second gen. I would hope so, but you have to wait and see.
Yeah, they're probably still waiting on sales and see how that goes.
What about 11-inch Pro X with headphone jack? No, not this year. there was no 11-inch Surface Pro coming this year.
One was thoughts on Microsoft once again blocking Office VBA macros. I have no thoughts.
No
unfortunately.
thoughts either.
That's a Mary Jo Foley question.
Yeah. I wonder if Moment 2 will be 22623. I would assume yes. Yeah, I think that's likely.
Dan, when is the new XPS review happening? I'm going to try to get out probably Wednesday. I did all the photos, did all the editing, all the benchmarks are done, except for battery, which I got to work on a little bit. And then, so I just got to basically write it up, which I'll try to do mostly on Monday. And it takes a while for me to put together those reviews.
Being it the 10th anniversary for Surface, are they going to do anything special? Colors / editions, etc. I'm not aware of anything specific regarding colors or editions. I think them merging the ARM version under the main brand will be a big deal, and does sort of harken back to the first Surface, which was an ARM device, the Surface RT. So maybe they could have a little throwaway line with like, "Hey, ARM is back. We're 10 years later. We're doing Surface on ARM once again."
I wouldn't be surprised. This is one of those 50-50 things. I wouldn't be surprised if they did like a special edition.
I would
anniversary
hope so.
version.
Yeah.
But I would also totally not be surprised if they didn't.
Because they rarely ever do any special surfaces, right? It's a rare thing.
Yeah, they did with the type covers.
Yeah.
That's where they did that stuff for a few years. And there were some really cool, like they had some artists that they teamed up with that made some special editions. They had the NFL ones.
Yeah.
And then there were some that were only in like a certain market or something like that. So I think that's one way they can do it. So that might be what they do, right? They do a special 10th anniversary type cover. That'd be one way to keep costs down. But it would be cool to have a limited edition run, special colored. Well, what color would it be?
Right, because black was
blue.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know.
Actually,
I would like a burgundy. Bring back burgundy.
Oh yeah, we want burgundy. Well, could you imagine they did a Surface Pro like in a light blue though, like the Windows blue?
That would be nice.
That'd be bold.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Why?
Thank God I don't design stuff.
Yeah. Why don't you ever invite PT and MJF? I assume you're talking about Paul Thurrott and Mary Jo Foley on the podcast. We actually have, we should have Mary Jo Foley on the podcast some point next month. That is in our schedule, and we'll talk about whatever's current at the time. She was supposed to be on this week actually, but we pushed that back because I was just on Windows Weekly, and we both decided that we would literally be talking about the same thing twice, so we might as well give it some time so we can have something different to talk about in the news.
Speaking of the type cover, do you think there's anything the Surface team might improve on a type cover? Absolutely. One thing I really want to see, I have heard rumors of this happening, but I can't say if it's Microsoft, is a haptic trackpad. There's been advances with it in terms of they can really control the power usage of it. And they're thin and they won't break. And so it's actually, and I've heard one company is basically going to do this. But we'll have to wait and see if if Microsoft does that. Like I said, I don't know, but that's one area I would definitely love to see. Other than that, not really. The big thing we got was with the new Slim Pen and with the little dock that's there, and I think that's one of my favorite new features. I think it's the best. Like I love having the pen now with me all the time, so I don't think they really need too much else. But just a haptic trackpad I think would be a big deal.
Daniel, do you think Surfaces are better computers than the rest of OEMs?
This is a tough question. We've mentioned this before on the podcast. They're very good core experience computers. That is the typing, the trackpad, the display. Like Surface Laptop Studios are really good, just like laptop. Like I really just enjoy using it. It gets really good battery life. The display is great. They just don't use a lot of cutting edge technology, right? If you want like an OLED display, like Microsoft doesn't do that. They don't use anti-reflective. They did use a haptic trackpad, which I thought I give them credit for. That was kind of a big choice for them. But the typing, the audio especially, they always do some of the best audio. It's just the overall experience. Like something like a Surface Pro 8, there's really nothing on the market like a Surface Pro 8. And so I know that doesn't directly compare. So if you want something like a Surface laptop, like say a 13-inch, like there are definitely better laptops out there, better value. But Zach and I would both agree on this. That like we just both love using Surface laptop. I think it's really great to type on. The trackpad, the display, the way it opens and closes, how quiet it is, the design. It's just something about the device that's really nice. So it's definitely subjective. And one thing that's happened is OEMs have really stepped up their game. Like when you have like Dell and the XPS 13 Plus, right? I mean, that's like they're really pushing the boundaries here on devices too. HP, I think, does great stuff. I really love Lenovo's work. So they're all kind of doing really kind of amazing work. Late to the show, did I hear correctly that the Surface Pro is getting P-Series CPU? That's what Zach is hearing.
Yes, it's not official yet, and that may change, you know.
Yeah.
They were
it's going to depend on battery life.
Yeah, they were certainly prototyping it earlier this year, but they may have found in their testing that it was too power hungry or it ran too hot, and so maybe they've decided to step down to the U series. But I heard that the P series was something they wanted to put in the Pro 9, so I guess we'll see later this year what they actually end up doing.
I'd be personally happy with the U series, because the U series is going to give you year over year performance improvement. Not so much for single core, but you're going to get the multi-core, a huge multi-core jump for that. And I feel like that's kind of worth it for that. But because if they go to P series, like I said, a P series is more powerful than an 11th gen H series. Like it's a pretty powerful chip. But the battery life can be a challenge on that device, especially when you combine it with a 120 hertz display.
I can only assume they'd want to go for that because they want to rival the iPad Pro, which is very powerful, the M1.
Yeah. And, you know, it's one question we don't know is what Microsoft feels about battery life on Surface Pro. You know, we ask you guys, of course, there's never enough, right? I could be like at 18 hours and like, oh, there should be 20 hours. So there's definitely no upper limit to what battery life should be. But the real question is, like, for consumers and people buying Surface Pro, like, do they consider it good enough? Like the HP Spectre X360 13.5, you know, it's got a U-series processor. It's getting like about 2 hours more battery life, supposedly, than last year's model, but it's not a huge jump across the board. Depends on what you're doing. But some companies are happy with that to keep the longer battery life and vice versa. So I don't know.
Are Microsoft ever going to get rid of the Windows registry, which is the last relic preventing Windows from ever becoming a really modern OS? I feel like you've asked this question before, and the answer is no. The registry is part of Windows. That's kind of one of the things that makes Windows Windows. Asking them to remove it would be like, well, essentially building a new OS. That's how Windows registers functions and things together. Without it, it wouldn't work. So... yeah, no, there's not going away. They may release a version that doesn't have a user accessible Windows registry, but there will always be something behind the scenes. Well, there will always be the Windows registry behind the scenes powering things or linking things.
Yeah,
together.
I mean, for consumers, I don't see why this would be an issue at all.
Yeah,
like, I don't get what the problem is. Yeah. If you're IT, you can easily block access to registry, in which case I don't get that issue either. So I'm not really sure what the advantage here.
Yeah.
Outside of saying we don't have a registry anymore, I don't get, you know, why that'd be good. It seems like it would also hamper developers who rely on changes to it.
Every modern version of Windows to date has had a registry. You may not have been able to access it. Windows Phone had a registry. Windows 10 X has a registry. It all has a registry. It's just on some versions you cannot access it, and some versions you can.
My next laptop would be the Lenovo X13S. I think you'd be very happy, especially the pricing is pretty nice on it. It's definitely I think when I wrote the article, I said it's $200 to $300 cheaper than their last always connected PC. Although you're getting much better hardware this time between the processor, the RAM, the SSD, the 5G is improved, and of course, definitely the processor is improved. I'm loving it. It feels so. Just to put in perspective, and I'll talk about this in the review, but it's exactly like the ThinkPad X1 Nano. Not exactly. It actually has an updated design, and I actually prefer the design of the X13S. But in terms of size, it's basically a spit and image of the X1 Nano, which is one of my favorite laptops. So you're going to get that, but you're going to get longer battery life. And the X1 Nano is going to get really powerful too. They're supposedly putting P series into that thing. So it's going to be a much more powerful device. But if you want battery life and the 5G stuff and fanless design that doesn't get hot, the X13S is pretty awesome.
The registry is making Windows slow gradually. Not the case with Apple's OSs or Linux.
This feels like very much like Windows 7, Windows XP talk. I don't know what you're talking about with Windows 11. Can you point me to any article that has demonstrated in performance numbers how registry is making Windows slow? Give me an actual number because I'd be interested.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Windows PCs can slow down if you install crap onto it all the time.
Right, especially with the startup.
But if you're sensible of what you're installing, you should be fine.
Yeah, and Apple. Someone says Apple OSs get slow over time. I mean, absolutely. Isn't that like a whole meme that every time a new iPhone comes out, the previous generation iPhone gets slower? And they actually showed that was actually true, or had to do with battery life too.
Do you think the Surface lineup will become more repairable or upgradable? Yes, on the repairable front, I think Microsoft, there's a big push in the Surface team to sort of make things
we did
an
article on that.
Yeah, more repairable, more eco-friendly. And being eco-friendly involves making it so instead of throwing a whole device away if it has a little issue, you can just repair that issue, whether that be by the end user or a professional technician is another story. I think Microsoft's sort of leaning on the more professional technician side of things. But yes, so I think that all services going forward are being designed with repairability in mind to a certain degree. Obviously, there will be exceptions to that, things like the Surface Duo, which are sort of very confinedly compact and very difficult to sort of put together with screws, so it can be easily replaced. They'll make exceptions where necessary, but for their mainstream PCs will certainly be more repairable going forward. Any word on Xbox Game Pass family plan, time of release, or details? No, nothing, unfortunately. All right, last call for questions. It's time to head off.
Surface Dock 3, haven't heard anything.
Have I heard anything? Give me a sec. I feel like I have heard something. Let me double check.
Or I haven't heard anything from Zach then. Have I considered doing a co-review with Dave 2D? I've never really spoken to Dave 2D, so I don't even know if he knows I exist. So no. I mean, I'd be up for it, but I don't think that's something he'd be... I don't know. You can ask him. I mean, I like his content. He does really great work, obviously. But yeah.
I can't find it now. 2023, I think there may be another one, but I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, they're probably switching it over. Well, yeah.
Oh, I think I remember hearing. I can't find my notes on it now. I think I remember it's going to be thinner because the current Surface Dock's quite a chunky thing, isn't it? I think the next one's supposed to be a bit thinner.
Yeah, I can see that happening. Everything's been getting smaller. The charger that ships with the XPS 13 Plus is a 60 watt, and it is super tiny. Like, it's the smallest charger I've ever seen. It's pretty absurd. Any thoughts on Microsoft Ignite? Well, we're not invited. There's no press.
Yeah,
so...
we should have mentioned that. Oh, well, forgot. Yeah, no press. To be fair, that takes a little pressure off us. We can cover the event from home, and it's easier that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a traditionally exciting event. And don't forget, around that time is when we expect the Surface event, the traditional fall Surface event that happens, which I think will be much more exciting. All right. I say we go and enjoy our Friday.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll be back next Friday. Follow us on Twitter. We'll keep you updated when we go live. But until then, we will see you next time. Bye.